This is a Hollywood movie here, so it's got to be really dramatic.
You know that? You really are dumb. Good God, I'm talking to a fucking block of moronic wood.
Most documentary filmmakers hope for a memorable goodbye, but only. Ginger Baker would say farewell by cracking a man across the face with his cane. It was 2010. The filmmaker was trying to leave, and Baker, frail, chain smoking, and fed up, decided that was the perfect moment for one last act of violence. The director later said it was because Baker liked him. That was the twisted logic of his world. For 8 decades, Ginger Baker was a human explosion, and we were all just lucky, or cursed, to witness the fallout. He was called the greatest drummer who ever lived, and the worst thing that ever happened to his friends. But what was the shocking truth behind the man who taught rock music how to swing, and then tried to destroy everyone who played with him? Long before the cane, before the heroin, before the supergroups, the fuse was lit in the most tragic way possible. In the rubble of post-war South London, a 4-year-old boy named Peter Baker was told his father wasn't coming home. Frederick Baker had been killed in the war, a loss that left a crater in his son's soul. Ginger would later confess that the white-hot rage that defined his drumming came directly from that moment. He never forgave the world for taking his father, and he spent the rest of his life making his drums sound like artillery fire in return. That rage needed an outlet, and as a teenager, he found it in the streets. His first love wasn't music, but the speed and freedom of bicycle racing. He was a natural with a lean, wiry physique built for it. But that dream was shattered by a cab that smashed into him, leaving him injured and lost. With nowhere else to channel his anger, he fell in with a gang in Bexley, graduating from scrapping to petty theft. This wasn't a rebellious phase. It was a descent. When he finally tried to quit the gang, the leader attacked him with a razor, leaving a permanent scar that had nothing on the ones he carried inside. But then, an accident of fate. A schoolmate played him a record by Phil Seaman, Britain's premier jazz drummer. The complex, swirling rhythms were a language Baker didn't know he understood. It was a revelation. He immediately started hammering on tin cans, then scraped together money for a cheap kit. He had found his weapon. But this salvation came with a poison pill. Seaman became his mentor, showing him how to make the drums sing, and in the same breath, he introduced the young Ginger to the needle, teaching him how to shoot up heroin. It was a dual inheritance of genius and self-destruction that would define his entire life. By the late 1950s, Baker was the unspoken problem child of the London jazz scene. He played with respectable bands like Bilks, but his playing was too ferocious, his temper too sharp. He was bored by the traditional Dixieland sound. He craved the wild, polyrhythmic storms of Elvin Jones and Max Roach. Band leaders saw a gifted but volatile young man who might detonate at any moment. And while he was brewing this professional chaos, he made a desperate attempt at a normal life, marrying a woman named Liz Finch and starting a family. But what looked like stability from the outside was a pressure cooker. His daughter, Nettie, would later reveal the sheer terror of living with a man whose temper was a ticking time bomb. He was trying to build a home, but the same rage that powered his drumming was already tearing the foundations apart. And things were about to get infinitely more complicated, because he was about to meet the one man who could match him, blow for blow, in musical brilliance and pure, unadulterated hatred. His name was Jack Bruce. They crossed paths in the band of blues pioneer Alexis Corner, and the connection was instant and explosive. They recognized in each other a mirror image, staggering talent, bottomless ambition, and a deep-seated need for conflict. On stage, their musical conversations were breathtaking. Off stage, their arguments ended with fists and sometimes with blades. In one infamous incident, Baker attacked Bruce with a knife. Bruce, in response, beat Baker to the ground with his double bass. This wasn't a creative difference. It was a war. And yet, from this toxic battlefield, a sound was emerging that would change rock and roll forever. Their battleground shifted to the Graham Bond Organization, a band that fused jazz, blues, and something much darker. Here, Baker wasn't just keeping time, he was building skyscrapers of rhythm. While other drummers pounded a simple backbeat, Baker wove in triplets and syncopated patterns that gave the music a dangerous, swinging feel. It was here he adopted his most famous weapon, a double bass drum kit. Inspired by jazzman Louis Bellson, Baker used it not for simple speed, but to create a thunderous, polyrhythmic foundation that felt like an approaching storm. Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath would later admit that without Baker, half of heavy metal wouldn't have known what heavy even meant. But the musical revolution happening on stage was constantly undermined by the chaos backstage. The fights with Bruce became legend. The band was a pressure cooker of drugs, ego, and venom. Baker was firing members mid-set, smashing equipment, and sinking deeper into the heroin habit his mentor had given him. He was a grenade with the pin already pulled, and everyone in the room knew it. He was creating a new musical language, but he was also ensuring that no one could stand to be in the same room with him for long. In 1966, disillusioned and restless, Baker went to see a band called John Mayall's Blues Breakers. He was floored by their guitarist, a young virtuoso named Eric Clapton. Baker, with typical subtlety, approached him immediately. He said he was forming a new band and that Clapton was the man he wanted. When intrigued, Clapton asked who would play bass. Baker delivered the punchline, "Jack Bruce." Clapton was stunned. "You must be joking," he said. "You hate each other." Baker just grinned and said, "It'll be all right." With those three delusional words, the world's first supergroup was born. They called themselves Cream. The rehearsals were less about music and more about psychological warfare. Baker later described it as an argument in sound. They would start playing, and within minutes, it was a musical shouting match. But somehow, against all logic, it worked. The friction created a spark that ignited a fire. When they hit the stage in 1966, they didn't just play songs. They unleashed a sonic assault. They were loud, improvisational, and utterly feral. This was a far cry from the polite pop of the era. This was something new, something dangerous. At the heart of this danger was Baker's drum solo. Toad, for the first time in rock, the drummer wasn't just a timekeeper in the back. He was a frontline soloist, holding audiences spellbound with 5, 10, sometimes 15 minutes of pure rhythmic fury. His double bass rolls weren't just fast. They were architectural, building complex patterns that seemed to defy physics. For young drummers hearing it for the first time, it was a revelation. Neil Peart of Rush would later call it a masterclass in controlled aggression. Their 1967 album, Disraeli Gears, was a psychedelic masterpiece, and driving one of its most iconic songs was a beat that came straight from a continent away. Sunshine of Your Love wasn't built on a standard rock beat. It was built on a hypnotic, tribal 12/8 rhythm Baker had absorbed from African records. He explained that those records taught him that rhythm could talk. And on that track, his drums didn't just keep time. They spoke in a primal, ancient tongue. But as Cream conquered the world, the darkness followed them. The tour became exercises in survival. Baker and Bruce often refused to travel together. Backstage, the fights were constant. One night, Baker hurled a drumstick at Bruce's head in the middle of a song. Clapton became the reluctant peacekeeper, a gentle soul trapped between two warring generals. The drugs were ever present, with Baker maintaining the fiction that he was a user, not an addict. His paranoia and volatility deepened. Clapton recalled that Baker would go off like a grenade, and you never knew what would set him off. His ego was as massive as his talent. He told Melody Maker he was the best drummer in the world. When informed that The Who's Keith Moon disagreed, Baker spat that Moon was a good clown, but he was a musician. This rivalry played out in bizarre ways. Moon, knowing Baker was financially reckless, once sent him a horse as a gift, a beautiful animal that would cost a fortune to stable. Baker, in a moment of perfect self-awareness, named the horse Psycho. The magic couldn't last. By 1968, the hatred had overwhelmed the music. A weary Clapton, sick of the constant tension, told Baker he was quitting. Baker was both livid and devastated. They announced a farewell tour, and their final concert at the Royal Albert Hall in November 1968 was filmed for posterity. Baker's last solo on Toad was more than a performance. It was an exorcism. A man battling every one of his demons in real time, channeling a lifetime of rage, loss, and brilliance through his kit. When it was over, Cream was finished. They had changed music forever. But as Baker himself admitted, it nearly killed him. He was now a global superstar, crowned the greatest drummer alive, and he was utterly lost. His band was gone, his most important musical relationship was in ashes, and his addiction was tightening its grip. He retreated to a new home in the stockbroker belt, a world away from his impoverished roots, but he brought the chaos with him. His daughter Nettie recalled a home life that was absolutely appalling, filled with arguments and a rotating cast of strangers. She once came home to find her father in bed with two of her own friends. His affairs were brazen, including one with the famous feminist author Germaine Greer. He was, by all accounts, a terrible husband and a terrifying father, but he was also incapable of standing still. Within months, he was plotting his next move. He wanted to break free from the pop circus, to create something grander and more exploratory. The idea was another supergroup, a band that could move beyond the blues into new, uncharted territory. The result was Blind Faith, featuring Eric Clapton once again and the soulful prodigy, Steve Winwood from Traffic. From the very beginning, Blind Faith was crushed by the weight of expectation. The press called them Super Cream, a label Baker despised. He insisted this was something new, something more musical. But the old problems resurfaced instantly. Clapton wanted subtlety and feel. Baker wanted fire and scope. He couldn't stop soloing, Winwood recalled. He played like he had to fill the air or he'd explode. Their debut album was an uneven masterpiece, and their first gig was a free concert in London's Hyde Park before 100,000 people. Baker, dressed in white, looked like a prophet, but the tour that followed was a disaster. The fans only wanted to hear Cream hits, and the band itself was cracking under drug-fueled exhaustion and artistic disagreement. After just one album and a handful of shows, Blind Faith imploded. Baker was adrift once more, his second supergroup in ruins. But amid the failure, a new obsession had taken root, one that would dictate the next wild chapter of his life. He had long been captivated by African rhythms, hearing their echoes in the jazz and blues he loved. During the Blind Faith tour, he'd connected with Nigerian percussionist Remy Kabaka, who introduced him to the explosive drumming of West Africa. Baker felt he'd been searching for that sound all his life. So, in an act of pure, unadulterated Ginger Baker madness, he decided to go to the source. In 1970, he packed his life into two Range Rovers and drove from London to Lagos, Nigeria's 7,000-mile journey across deserts, through war zones and over broken borders. The trip was an odyssey of near-mythic proportions. He bribed officials, dodged bandits, and nearly died of thirst in the Sahara. When he finally arrived in Lagos, half delirious, he set about building his dream. A 16-track recording studio he called Arc Studio. It was the first of its kind in West Africa. He insisted he didn't go to Africa to bring rock to the continent. He went to learn. He immersed himself in the local scene, befriending the king of Afrobeat, Fela Kuti. Baker was in awe. He joined Fela's band, Africa 70, for a time, performing marathon sets at the famous Shrine nightclub. The resulting album, Fela Ransom Kuti and the Africa 70 with Ginger Baker Live, is a raw, rhythmic masterpiece. On the track He to Smell, Baker and Fela's legendary drummer, Tony Allen, engage in a drumming conversation across continents. Baker later said Tony Allen taught him more about drumming than anyone else, that he could make a simple beat talk to you. His studio became a hub. Paul McCartney famously recorded parts of Band on the Run therein, 1973, but true to form, Baker's paradise began to curdle. His finances were a mess, his temper alienated his hosts, and he fought with Fela and Nigerian officials over money and politics. He had a genius for finding trouble, a friend said. Wherever he went, chaos followed. Before his Nigerian empire fully collapsed, however, he launched another ambitious project back in England, Ginger Baker's Air Force. This was a sprawling jazz rock big band, a chaotic collective, featuring members of Traffic and Blind Faith. Their live shows were legendary for their sheer, unhinged ambition. It was like a flying circus, Winwood joked, but the project was financially and personally unsustainable. Baker's leadership style was described as imperious and erratic. He didn't lead, he commanded, said saxophonist Graham Bond. The Air Force crashed almost as quickly as it took off. By the mid-1970s, the Nigerian dream was over. The economy was collapsing, and Baker's drug habit was worse than ever. Facing threats from creditors and the government, he fled the country in 1976, leaving his studio behind. He became a nomad, bouncing between Italy, Los Angeles, and England, always one step ahead of his reputation and his debts. Everywhere he went, he left fire behind, a road manager noted. Back in England, his long-suffering wife Liz finally reached her limit. She had tolerated the groupies and the tantrums, but when she uncovered his affair with a teenage hospital receptionist named Sarah Dixon, it was the final straw. Liz reportedly gave Sarah a black eye and then kicked Ginger out for good. The man who had spent a fortune on heroin, Polo, and now a teenage lover, was finally facing a domestic reckoning. Polo had become his new obsession, a passion he pursued with the same ferocious intensity as drumming. It was also, like everything in his life, ruinously expensive. A friend noted he'd rather spend money on a horse than on himself, eating beans on toast for a week to afford a new saddle. His old friend Remy Kabaka perfectly summarized Baker's three great loves: drums, heroin, and horses, in that order. His relationship with his children was a disaster. His son, Kofi, gave a heartbreaking assessment, saying, "He's disowned me so many times in my life. It's like he's been dead to me for a long time." Baker himself admitted he was a poor father and husband. "I wasn't made for domestic life," he confessed. "I'm a drummer, that's all I know." The 1980s and 90s were a blur of failed projects, brief reunions, and growing health problems. He played with Hawkwind, formed a band called Energy, and lived in a dilapidated Italian farmhouse breeding polo ponies. He was a revered innovator to some, a total pariah to others. In 1994, he succumbed to the temptation and reunited with Jack Bruce and guitarist Gary Moore in the power trio BBM. The chemistry was as explosive and toxic as ever. Their one album, Around the Next Dream, showed flashes of the old fire, but the tour collapsed amid the same old animosities. "We should have known better," Bruce sighed. "Some things don't change." But as the new millennium dawned, a miracle seemed possible. In 2005, after nearly 40 years of silence, Cream agreed to reunite for a series of shows at the Royal Albert Hall and Madison Square Garden. Tickets sold out in minutes. For fans, it was a resurrection. For the band, it was a weary truce. "We agreed not to kill each other," Baker said dryly. "The performances were powerful but restrained three old masters, finding a fragile, common ground. It was beautiful," Clapton said. "We played like grown-ups for once, behind the scenes." The old tensions still simmered. "He never changed," Bruce said. "But then, neither did I when the final applause faded at Madison Square Garden." Baker walked off stage smiling, a rare sight. "I suppose that was closure," he muttered. "I didn't kill Jack. Jack didn't kill me. And Eric didn't run off crying." For Ginger Baker, that was as close to harmony as it got. The reunion brought him a final wave of acclaim, but his body was beginning to fail. Decades of abuse had taken their toll. He was diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, severe arthritis, and a degenerative heart condition. He underwent open-heart surgery in 2016. Blogging about it in his signature caustic style, "Saw my cardiologist. Big problem. No more gigs for now. It's a bastard." Yet he still played when he could, leading the Ginger Baker Jazz Confusion. He was frail, often seated, but when he counted in a song, the years melted away. You could still hear Africa in him, said percussionist Abbas Dodu. The 2012 documentary, Beware of Mr. Baker, captured him in all his vicious, brilliant, and hilarious glory, culminating in the now legendary Kane attack on the director. He hit me because he liked me, the director claimed. It was his way of showing affection. In his final years, there were glimpses of a strange serenity. He married for a fourth time, to a Zimbabwean nurse named Kudzai Machikoto, who was 42 years his junior. He claimed he wasn't afraid of dying, that he'd been close plenty of times. It's just another rhythm, one you can't hear, he said. When Jack Bruce died in 2014, Baker was devastated. He called Bruce his brother, and sometimes worse. He didn't go to the funeral, wanting to remember him as he was when we were kings. Clapton later revealed that Baker had wept in private. The end came on October 6, 2019. He was 80 years old. His daughter Nettie announced he had passed peacefully, laughing and listening to jazz. But the peace of his death was immediately shattered by the chaos he left behind. A bitter feud erupted between his fourth wife and his children from previous marriages over his meager estate. The man who had earned and spent millions was virtually broke. The final, shocking twist was that his family alleged Kudzai had hidden his most precious possession, his drum kit, using it as leverage in the dispute. After a life of immense noise and fury, the last fight was over the tools he used to create it. So, what are we to make of this man? The legacy is as complicated as the man himself. Eric Clapton called him a unique force. Stuart Copeland of The Police declared him the alpha drummer. He changed how we think about time, wrote Questlove. Every drummer in rock and jazz carries a piece of his innovation, but Ginger Baker would have hated the hero worship. He despised nostalgia. He was a man who craved truth in rhythm, in performance, and in his own fury. "I can't fake it," he once said. "If I play, I give everything. If I can't give everything, I don't play." He died broke, estranged from most of his family, and difficult to the very end. But he lived exactly as he played, with every ounce of his being, completely on his own terms, and with a sound that was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly unforgettable. "Music's not polite," he warned us. "It's dangerous. Always was." And for 80 years, Ginger Baker was its most dangerous prophet. So, what are we to make of this man? The legacy of Ginger Baker is a paradox, as thunderous and complex as one of his own drum solos. On one hand, he was a genuine revolutionary, an architect of sound who single-handedly dragged the drummer from the back of the stage to the front, transforming them from a timekeeper into a storyteller, a soloist, a force of nature. He injected the swing of jazz and the ancient pulse of Africa into the heart of rock and roll, forever expanding its vocabulary. His influence echoes in every heavy metal blast beat, in every progressive rock odd time signature, in the very idea that a drummer can be a band's explosive, creative core. But this genius came at a terrifying cost, a price paid by everyone who ever got close to him. The same relentless passion that fueled his playing also fueled a lifetime of destruction. He was a human wrecking ball to his friendships, his finances, and his family. He died as he lived broke, estranged, and embroiled in one final, petty feud over the very drums that were his voice. The man who taught rhythm to speak could never master the language of peace. Perhaps that was the unavoidable trade. Maybe the seismic rage he channeled through his kit, the rage born from a 4-year-old boy losing his father, could never have been contained within a normal life. The demons that made him a legend were the same ones that made him a monster. He was the living, breathing proof that supreme artistry doesn't come from a place of comfort, but from a deep, unhealed wound. Ginger Baker wasn't just a drummer. He was a cautionary tale written in rhythm and blood, a blinding light that burned everything it touched, including himself. He was the best bloody drummer that ever lived. Or, at the very least, he sure as hell scared the SHT out of us. If you have a favorite Ginger Baker moment, whether it's the seismic solo in Toad, the African-infused Drive of Sunshine of Your Love, or one of his Famously unhinged interviews. I want to know about it. Drop your pick in the comments below and let's get the conversation started. And if you want to dive deeper into stories the mainstream media never tells about rock and roll's most chaotic legends, you need to check out my Patreon. That's where I drop my exclusive series, Rock and Roll Histories, every single week. We're talking untold stories, shocking revelations, and deep dives into the artists who truly changed the game. The link is in the description below. Go sign up. It's seriously good stuff. In the meantime, I've been your host, Chester. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and remember, beware of Mr. Baker. Cheers.